Hey there, how are you doing? Thought I'd give you a little weekly update on what's going on, me and Turo. So again, I am a host up in Ontario, Canada. I'm in Atwood, Ontario. So pretty small little community. I run one vehicle. It's a 2014 Mitsubishi Outlander. Kind of nice little vehicle from that standpoint. A seven passenger with V6. It's a GT model, so it's nicely equipped. It's got everything except for the nav, and that's a vehicle I've been looking for because I find the nav systems on vehicles that are 6 to 10 years old tend to be a little dated, and to the most part, most people are using their phone. So that just seems to be the trend. So really, all they really want is the Bluetooth to be able to pair their phone up or to have that mirrored screen image to be able to transfer their stuff, especially when it's a vehicle that's not theirs. They're only going to have it for a week or a few days. So it's just one of those things that I find that at least my experience renting cars, my background on that one. So yeah, so that's basically what I've been doing. Right now, I'm past the 6 month mark. So Turo has sent out notice that I've got to take the vehicle in for a yearly inspection. Well, not yearly, a bi-yearly inspection. So essentially, it's actually very straightforward. List is there. I talked about it in my last little, I guess, conversation on the YouTube Live. So it's pretty straightforward from that standpoint. In fact, it's less points than a safety or even a commercial inspection. So essentially, it's just a visual. The drawback to it is that it does require that the wheels come off to do a brake inspection. And this time of year, not that motivated to do it. And we've got probably one of the biggest snowfalls, I guess, this year going on this weekend. Plus, we've had some pretty cool temperatures. And I had planned to take care of this down the road when I was going to do the tire changeover for from winters to summers. So that would have been a month or 6 weeks from now, maybe a little longer depending on weather. So I intended to do that inspection then. So it's one of those things where do I take it to a shop, which I probably end up will doing. It's been haven't had the opportunity to get it done. Do I do that and pay just to have that inspection done, or do I do it if I go to a mom and pop shop and say I need the tires rotated or an oil change and general maintenance check? Because usually I'll fix anything that's broken or needs repair. Um, and usually they'll just throw that little inspection in for free because they literally got everything off anyways. So it's one of those things where, or do I go spend an hour shop time and get that completed? So it's one of those little debate items. At the same time, it's brutal outside, so I haven't been that motivated to go do it. And to be honest with you, it's been nice having the Outlander available during the bad weather. So it's been one of those little things where it's kind of like I sold the Chevy Cruze, so that's gone. It had the remote start, and it was kind of nice. So just having the Outlander is just a nice feature during bad weather. So it's one of those things that I feel comfortable with because it's got the all-wheel drive system, and it's Mitsubishi's super all-wheel drive, which means it's automated. You just put it into a snow mode, and it just kicks in and out as required. It's got the lock and a whole bunch of little features to it, but predominantly you just leave it in auto and let it do its thing. And it seems to do really well as long as you don't go too crazy. You don't go on the back roads or go onto the. It's not really designed to go off road. It's more of a highway cruiser or country roads, that type of thing. So it's decent from that standpoint. Changed up my insurance broker, so that happened last week. I think we talked about that briefly. So I've been dealing with a insurance company that basically changed hands, and that they're changing the way in which they handle their business essentially. So the dilemma is that they've gone mostly to a call center. They don't really provide any education or real assistance to the folks that are actually working in the call center. And the dilemma is that when I was dealing with Turo related issues, it was like button heads. It was really a weird environment to have a conversation with. It's very strange. I switched my insurance companies to the same company that Turo uses. So essentially, my personal insurance is the same company that insures Turo. So I thought by doing that, I'd be able to save a lot of kind of that bleed through or that uncomfortable where if you're with one company, they go, ah, we don't really cover that, but the other company does, or the other company goes, well, we don't really cover that, the other company does. Whereas if I just had it together and said, well, good news, um, I'm insured by your insurer, so there's no real gray area. Just dealing with the broker that I was dealing with, it just turned into a bit of a nightmare from that standpoint. So, yeah, problematic from there. Um, so I switched brokers. That's essentially what it is. They couldn't give me the rate increase uh, 3 months prior to as well, so that was a struggling point for me. I like to be able to budget for things, and they told me ahead of time that based on clerical errors and some issues that they had, that my rates were going to jump up 30%, but they couldn't give me an actual total. It was more like just a number in the wind. And so that day I went to Scotiabank, got a quote, and Scotiabank was actually on par or just a little bit cheaper. I threw in a couple of little extras that weren't part of my policy, but a pretty decent thing. But I couldn't go with them because I have an older car, and Scotiabank through their brokerages don't deal with older cars. Like they have a cutoff period. So I ended up going to a little independent broker out in my neck of the woods in Atwood. Um, no experience with Turo, so really can't help me from that standpoint. Although there was a willingness to actually pick up the phone and call and have a conversation, which was nice. Still didn't get the same result that I was expecting, and I think that's because combination of things. I don't think the insurance company that is with Turo is very good. So I think that's the problem there. They point out that you'll get a rate reduction if you have your vehicle out. So in other words, it's logical when you think about it. So if you've got your vehicle out, someone else is driving it, you're not driving it. So really, their commercial policy is covering it at the time that you have a person out there in the vehicle. There's really no need for you to be paying for your personal insurance during that timeline. So if I book that vehicle out for 15 days out of the month, well, I'm really only paying 15 days of personal insurance. That's not really how it works with Turo. So they say that, but the brokers can't do it, and the insurance companies don't support it, or the insurance company that they're with doesn't support it. So it's one of those things where it's a statement on their website that you can kind of ignore. At the same time, I don't know why they put it out there because it's not really that big of a saving. Well, it is. It's a savings from that standpoint. Like it's one less thing to worry about. But if you want to get into the car rental business, or that's your intent, uh, regardless whether or not you've got that little bridging point where your insurance is covered, bleeding into that insurance, and you're paying a little extra than you should, you're not paying for office space, commercial insurance. You don't have to get an ONVEC license, host of stuff that you're kind of ducking out of by using Turo for the first time. So it's a good way of kind of dipping your foot in the water and seeing whether or not you like the idea of owning and operating a rental company. It's no real commitment, pretty straightforward from that standpoint. So that's why I went with Turo. It's a great way to get going. Plus, you'll get 1 year experience under a commercial policy, which means that when you go to, if you decide to down the road, to go and open up your own little leasing or rental agency, you can say, look, I've had kind of roundabout way commercial insurance so that they're familiar with you and how you do your claims process. So I think that's important. So if you're out there and going, okay, I'd like to be able to advance this down the road, or you want to move into something like a car rental business, or you want to become a car dealer in Ontario, Canada, this is probably the easiest way to develop a little experience with insurance to be able to roll into that and say, okay, this is where I would like to be. So I haven't really done a master plan for 5 years to say, hey, I'm going to turn this into a rental company. I want to just try it. And I figured if I do it for a year, I can do a nice little series of podcasts, which is what I'm doing. And I've been doing these little live videos to kind of keep track of what I'm doing so that, at the end of the year, I can go back and kind of rewatch this and kind of edit some of the audio, add to it, create that podcast series that I want to do. So that's the intent from that standpoint. So with that said, what have I been doing since the car's been down, other than shoveling snow and freezing to death? been working. I have a regular job, so I've been doing that. And strangely enough, moving snow and uh, digging things out has been fairly big lately because we've had some of the biggest snowfalls on record here in southern Ontario. So interesting. The media's kind of hyped it up. It's kind of a big deal, but to be honest with you, we get this every year. So it's not an unusual circumstance to come out and find out there's snow in Ontario, Canada. It's kind of normal. The poor guys down in Montreal and Quebec, because of the lake effect, they get a lot more than we do. So hats off to them because they're probably head deep in snow, I'm going to assume. And usually their roads are terrible. So beyond that, so what else have I been doing? Well, my intent was to build up a little, potentially, depending on how the response is from folks out there looking at doing Turo in Canada. I'm up to about a 200 and I think I'm still at 285 subscribers, which is pretty great. I've got no complaints from that standpoint because this is a really small market in Canada. It's kind of a bit of a niche, so there's really no one out there talking about it. There's a lot of stuff down in the States about Turo, but I thought I'd give that a try, right? So that's essentially what this is just a little run through. So with that said, I've had a week off Turo, so I've been doing some upgrades. So going out and spending money, essentially that's what it is, but not a lot of money because let's face it, there's not a lot there to pick from. But so I've been on government auctions, and the one that I've been going on to is Government Deals Liquidity Services and Marketplace. Now these guys are predominantly U.S., so that's kind of where they're sourced to, but they do Canadian as well. And they predominantly have school boards, and looks like they've got a couple of the RCMP contracts and a few of the other little government contracts. So I've been watching the auctions there just to see what's coming up, and it's been kind of in the back of my mind that at some point I wanted to upgrade my G5, which I have a great big giant old school Apple computer, which doesn't actually run Apple anymore. I've actually moved it off onto another a long list of stuff there. I do 3D printing, and I do some pretty heavy graphic stuff, and I do some pretty interesting stuff with 3D software. So I basically cleared my G5 of the operating system that Apple has and converted its architecture to something a little more open sourced to allow me to do that. And it served the purpose. And I was using it kind of sectioned off a little bit of the hard drive to be able to run some more traditional stuff to be able to do YouTube and things like that. So it was on my list to at some point either upgrade that completely, change it out, or get a separate system altogether. And so I've been watching the government auction for that reason. So long story essentially on that one. And I came across a Apple 27-inch from 2013. So the process on buying from government deals .com is pretty straightforward. I was actually really surprised how easy this went. I put in a bid of my max, what I wanted to spend. It just bid up to that point, and I ended up getting, actually, it bid out less than what I wanted to spend. So it works as far as that's concerned. So I got this unit for about $300. So great value from that standpoint. It's got 24 gigabytes, so it's pretty decent from that standing. It's an older computer, so I'm offsetting the age by having a little more RAM there just to kind of help out a little bit. Video card's pretty decent. It's a late 2013 model. It's the i5, not the i7, so it's not the top end by any stretch of the imagination. But I just thought I like the Apple architecture when it comes to doing YouTube and a few other little things. So I thought, well, I'd bite the bullet, get one of these, and they came with the keyboard, the mouse, kind of the peripheral stuff that you all need to get the thing up and running. Brought it home, and a nice thing on this one was inadvertently, it was actually very close to where I live, which I find surprising. I figured that to get something like this, I would have had to travel into North York or make a road trip, a couple hours. So this turned out to be literally just around the corner in Clinton, which is about a half hour or 40-minute drive. And they had it all bundled up and ready to go, and it was out of the school system there. So they had wiped the computer hard drive, added in the new operating system to it. So really, they would have spent probably an hour getting this thing ready. It had the kid marks all over it from fingerprints and stuff like that. So I did have to clean it, but beyond that, it was pretty easy. They included a nice Apple mouse. They didn't include an Apple keyboard, but they included a generic one. And because of my collection of things I can't throw out, I always have Apple bits all over the place. So I have a classic Apple keyboard that just plugs right in and works great. So it's old school. So I like that. So it works well. The camera on it seems to be pretty decent. I've already shot a couple little things with it, so it's all right. The next big dilemma is to work on my incredibly slow and incredibly poor internet provider. I'm on a rural area, so I've got to use dial-up. So that's why you see grains and all sorts of crappy things on the screen. It's just the nature of it, unfortunately. But at some point, I've got to figure out a way to address that. So that'll probably be in the next 6 months, hopefully. If not, I'm hoping that you're not really watching this, that you're really just listening to the content, if you are into Turo. I haven't yet been able to get my Blue Yeti mic to work on the iMac. I plugged it in a couple times. It just didn't want to recognize it. So I've got to find some drivers for that. So that's the next project for next week. So we're using the mic that's provided. So again, I do apologize if it's a little mute because I do try to provide good audio. Unfortunately, that's just the nature of it right now. So that's what we've been doing, government deals. Now, the other one in government deals, which this is Turo related. So I've been going through the automotive end of it. I've been watching to come across a sport utility or a pickup truck to be able to add on to Turo. I've been kind of kicking around the idea, and I've run across a Land Rover that I kind of like. The dilemma is that it's not quite at that price point where I can justify it. It's one of those things where they're close, but we're still about $1,000 or maybe $1,500 away, which in Land Rover world doesn't sound like a lot, but when you're looking at an 8-year-old or a 10-year-old Land Rover, you have to kind of tuck a little extra money aside because parts are a little harder to come by. They tend to cost a little more. They're not outlandish, but they do cost a little more from that standpoint. Being an Outlander or even the Range Rover products, some mechanics are hesitant, much like having a Jag, to work on them. So it's one of those things where some garages won't touch them. So it's one of those things where I've got to do a fair bit of the work myself, just the nature of it, which I'm fine with from that standpoint. But the dealer that I'm dealing with is fairly logical. They took it in on trade. They've got a number they've got to kind of play with. I understand that. But at the same time, the market sets the value on a car. This is where, if you're out there buying vehicles, I'm not a wholesaler, I'm not a dealer, so I'm not trying to, you know, I'm just trying to get a decent deal as a consumer. But the consumers set the market value. The dealers will put a price out. And this is where dealing with the dealer becomes abstract and kind of argumentative to a certain extent, whereas normally I would buy off a private individual. And a private individual usually has a certain degree of logic to it. Usually they'll follow along pretty good is what I'm getting at. And usually they're very, very, very good. Dealers tend not to be. So when I go buy a vehicle on the private end of it, I already have a number in my mind. I'm not shopping for a $6,000 vehicle listed at $10,000. I'm already kind of pre-qualifying by looking for vehicles that sit in the price range that I want. So when I'm calling or talking to the person, I'm in the realm of logic. There's a reason why I call, right? So I'll pull a buyer's package out from the MTO. They're $20. And they'll give you a wholesale and they'll give you a retail value. It's pretty straightforward. Sometimes they're out to lunch, sometimes they're close. And also run a couple of services on the internet to see whether that's pretty accurate. So there's been a couple that come up that have been kind of a little odd, but to the most part, going that route kind of says that. Plus, the $20 I think is a drop in the bucket if you're going to go buy a car, to be able to confirm ownership, whether or not it's been hit, whether it's branded. It'll give you some other things other than maintenance, whereas a car proof report will do that, but a car proof report is almost $75. So it's one of those things where if you're looking at a vehicle that's $6,000 to spend $75 to verify the history. Mm, hard one to take if you're going to go look at a bunch of them, right? Whereas if you said, okay, it's $20 and you've narrowed it down to five, that it makes sense from that standpoint. Plus, you can gauge when you're there. You can kind of go, okay, is this person telling me the truth about the car? Yes, they've owned it for 3 years. It says right there in the report. Is it branded? It'll say right there. It's not branded. Everything's nice and clear. So that's what I usually do. Whereas when you go to a dealer, they've kind of got a preset number in their mind of what they feel that vehicle is worth, and they don't really want to maneuver around it, especially if it's not necessarily a franchise dealer, but a franchise style dealership. In other words, they've got a finance office, a showroom, perhaps a garage in the back, where they're going to be a little more motivated to try and get that price up than to work with you and get a fair number. That's just the nature of it. So just be aware of that. So this one came up. Chat GTP, strangely enough, said, hey, this is the one to look for. It's got a good return. So in other words, I'm going to spend probably around that 10 grand mark on it. It'll rent out at about $100 to 150 range on a daily. Then you start taking your discounts off, so really it's probably 75. So it really means I'm probably walking out with $50 a day on it, $60 a day after Turo goes through their stuff. So that kind of gives you an idea. You say 150, but it really relates to 60 or 70 bucks in your pocket. So it's a vehicle that's doable, and I think that it's got enough of a response where most folks will rent it if it's priced right. And it presents well. It looks like a nice vehicle. The dilemma is being a Land Rover. You just you can't overpay for them. You have to be able to pocket a little bit of money to say, hey, I'm probably going to have to do a rear diff service. I'm probably going to have to deal with some shocks or some suspension issues with it because that's just the nature of what they are. The little engines that they put in there are generally, speaking of the age I'm looking at, are Ford 2 liters. So they're pretty reliable. They're not too bad from that standpoint, but there's still some quirks to them. So it's one of those things where um, I'm on the entry level of it. So it's a vehicle that I'm looking at and kind of going, well, who does this vehicle market to? And I'm trying to get into an SUV that typically would rent out, not to an off-roader, but to someone who's doing highway and city travel, and I'm looking for more of a woman's SUV, something that's got a little more comfort to it than anything else. Which the Jaguar, not the Jaguar, the Outlander that I'm looking at, it's skewed that way when it was sold. It was designed or marketed towards women, and it's exactly what I would want to market to on Turo. So it's one of those things where you kind of go, okay, that makes sense. Just less headaches, less hassles to deal with. They're not jeeping it essentially, right? So I'm going through the process there. We're kind of in the middle of negotiating, so we'll see what happens. But again, I'm not in love with it, so it's one of those things where I can walk away. And if you're out there shopping for a car for Turo, you have to be able to say to yourself, okay, there's a multitude in the marketplace. Another one will come up. If not that one, something else. And at some point, the dealer will probably go, okay, I've got to let that go, or they're going to roll into the next month, the next month, the next month. And they'll get to the point where they'll get nickel and dimed anyways. So I'm not telling them anything that they don't know. It's just the nature of it. So we'll see where that's going. And the market is pretty slow right now. I put my Outlander up for sale. Um, Not necessarily because I want to sell it, but it's one of those things where if I've got to do the inspection report anyways, and it's going to come back clean, which I think it will, means it'll qualify for a safety. And if I can get what I paid for it, and or even a little less, I can roll that into getting the, the next vehicle, and then continue with the year. And then I have the excitement of saying, okay, I've got a fresh post. I've got new reconditioning to do. I've got basically starting fresh again. So it's one of those things where I can kind of review some of the mistakes I made on the Outlander and kind of address them on the next one and improve, kind of just build as we go. If the Outlander doesn't sell, in other words, I don't have to sell it. I can keep it on Turo and it's paying for itself. So it's not really an issue from that standpoint. It'll continue, in which case I'll say, well, now I have two vehicles in the stable. Again, I did get rid of the Cruise mainly because its rental rate wouldn't really offset the increased costs in insurance. And I wasn't getting a huge response off of it. And I think on that situation, it was too close to what you could get at a rental agency that's fairly common. So if I were to call Budget or Tilden up here, I would probably find something equivalent to a cruise on a discounted rate that would be not necessarily in the realm of what Turo would have as far as price point, because I think that one was 55 or something like that on a daily. Then you'd start discounting, right? So I think it would still be cheaper, but it's one of those things where some looking at going to go, well, for 12, 15 bucks, I can go get something newer, right? Whereas if I get into a Land Rover, or even the Outlander is kind of funny in that regards, it has a different market to it. They're not looking at necessarily price point. They're looking at all-wheel drive. They're looking at that third row. They're looking at it from a standpoint. If they're going to go to a Tilden or a budget, they're into a larger SUV with a third row into it, and they're looking at larger billing. So that's what that one seems to work out as far as why people get it. And they don't want to be into a minivan or a budget van to go that route. So I think the Land Rover would be a nice touch. Plus, I like British cars, so it's one of those things where it might be a fun little item to tinker on and play with. And everything on the internet says they're hard to kind of keep up and running. I don't know if that's the case. I've been doing research on it, and so far, yeah, it does seem to have some concerns. But I think it's how they report um, the services on the vehicle. I think that they get their intervals are spread too far apart, so that you run into issues. Whereas if you're doing maintenance, you really should be doing it every 10,000 or 6,000 K, especially in Southern Ontario where the weather is so wide. We get really hot summers, we get really cold winters, we get road salt, debris, we get potholes, everything, right? It's a mix of four seasons. So really in this neck of the woods, you really should be putting it on a hoist, at least to do a check over twice a year. Whether that's tire rotation or oil change, it needs to get a view. It's got to save you money. Like that's just the way that works. So if you end up getting a brake line that's bad, or you end up getting a suspension air ride problem, usually you can catch that fitting or that bent bit or that rusty bolt or something long before it becomes a problem. So that's why you want to do that. Whereas Land Rover seems to put them out at 20,000 or 24,000 K recommended service points, which I guess if you're trying to sell the car, sounds great. It's going to cost you less to maintain and service. But if you're going to go past that 100K mark or past that 80K mark without doing those regular services a little earlier, you're going to have some issues. Like that's just Honda, Toyota, anybody would have the same problem. So it's just one of those things you got to watch for. So that's where we've been at. So upgraded the computer. Got to work on getting the internet upgraded. Did our first government auction purchase, so we know how that works. Oh, side note on that. 10%, how did that work? 6% service charge, and then there was like a dock fee of like $1.87. So that's how they make their money. They make 6%, and they make for the transaction with your credit card, they bill you $1 or something. I don't know what that was called, but it's not a huge amount. But it's one of those things like, oh, okay, I get that, plus your taxes. So $300 plus tax, your 6% plus your dollar and change for the transaction. And yeah, I'm pretty happy with it. So I'll probably end up going back through government deals. Again, I've been watching the cars going through. There's some pretty tempting deals there. The dilemma is you can't check them before you purchase, so you're buying them essentially blind. You run a car proof report or do the MTO, which I've done on one. I looked at a Jeep. I was thinking of buying that, and it just went too high. It went for retail. I don't know why you couldn't justify that in my mind. It was actually beyond that. I talked about that in another video. So I just watch it. So you never know, something might come up. And we're coming up to 28 minutes. So again, slow time of year. We're going to wrap it up. I know I shoot for 30, and normally I run to 45 because I tend to babble on. But that's where we're at. So again, I hope you enjoy these videos. Again, if you are on Turo and you're in Southern Ontario, I'd love to hear some feedback from you. Also, if you are an insurance broker that specializes in Turo or you're familiar with it, love to hear from you from that standpoint. Very few of you out there that are knowledgeable from that area. Still have that open invitation out for anyone that's doing leasing or financing. Like to hear from you guys and kind of what the impact is on Turo or peer-to-peer rental on your contracts. That would be kind of a fun conversation to have. Again, I'd love it if you did the little thumbs up or subscription. I do apologize for the audio level on this particular video. Again, we are working with new equipment, well, new to me equipment, and we'll get kind of the bugs out of the way over a period of time. And again, if you're interested in the podcast or information on the podcast, by all means, um, send a comment. I'll put you in the little rotation. So when it's available, I'll send it off to you. Okay. Have a pleasant and enjoyable day. See ya.